All right, this is something I've been working on for a while, and hopefully by explaining it, I will myself understand it, and also be able to pass it on to everybody else. It has to do with time, and I did a video about Chronos and Kairos, the two Greek words from time, but I'm going to add in what's known as Logos. And Chronos, to review, is the measurement of time. So, the ticking by of seconds and minutes and hours and recording it and having a calendar and, days, months. That's the recording of time. It's technically history. Kairos is the expression of time, the subjective understanding of time. So Kairos tells us when something is supposed to happen, or the subjective understanding of how we felt or how that time, the quality of it was. Logos is the presence of being inside of the flow of time. So we have the measurement of time, we have the understanding of time, and then we have the being the present in, or being a part of the flow of time. And we often get things a little disconnected because of how we think about dimensions. And dimensionality has a lot to do with measurements, and time is just another one of the measurements. So we're actually a fourth dimensional existence. We have the XYZ plane. So if you look top down on a 2D plane, we coordinate that X and Y. And then when we add height, the third dimension, we add the Z plane. That's what we do with engineering when we build things, 3D printing and that stuff. We create the X and the Y coordinate, and then the Z, the height axis. Time is the fourth measurement, and that's what allows us to move and to do and to exist and to measure time, chronos, is because we move throughout it. And so we have the t-axis and time. So if we have a three-dimensional object that moves 1 second to a new position, time is a fraction of a wave. And I won't get into too much waveform, but essentially we have the crest and the trough of the wave, and then the midpoint. Time, as I understand it, is a destruction cycle. It has to do with the primordials. I'm working on a book that talks about the primordials quite a bit. But the primordials are chaos, infinite possibility, creation, the giving the framework to that possibility, order, organizing and bringing a definition to that framework, and then destruction. This is Ouroboros. The finishing the definition of what that framework actually entails, so that there is a completed something, and then that something can go back to chaos to be part of the infinite possibility. When we talk about time, it's that cycle, and that cycle happens, at best estimate, about once every 22 trillion times a second. So here I have, we have a 3D object moving, and these are 22 little versions of that object, which is 1/1 trillionth of the scale of what's actually happening inside that second. What's that important for? That's to show us how Logos works. That measurement is the measurement of Logos, how we move through time, how we are present through time. And that has to do with the three health bodies. In Stoic Bodywork, we talk about the three health bodies a lot, because that is the function of self. Self is made of body, mind, and spirit. We have the physical health body, which is what I do in my bodywork practice. We work with that quite often. We have the mental health body, which is the realm of mental health providers. And then we have the spiritual health body, which is its own health body that others need work in. And oftentimes we have to figure out which of these health bodies the work needs to be done in, so that they can all agree to how time actually works. And so above here you see past, now, and future. Now is the present, but it's really the eternal now, the very open-ended moment. So that's why it's not closed. The past doesn't exist. It's been destroyed. We've moved forward. Every second we destroy it 22 trillion times. The future doesn't exist either. That's a prediction. That's what the cognitive function of the human system is really designed to do, is to look at what could possibly happen and then prepare for it as best as possible. That's the human system, the body, the mind, the spirit. And the spirit body often knows ahead of time because it exists outside of that framework, because the self is the totality of it. So being present in the now is really understanding that the past is destroyed and the future doesn't exist. And so you have to live inside of this moment because that's all that actually is reality. We do that by experiencing the three health bodies, and they each have their own coordinate, right? So the body is the measurement of Chronos. It's the slowest of the health bodies. It measures all the things, the wrinkles on the skin, the length of the hair, my nails, the different markings, getting new tattoos and strength training and building muscle. And as a kid grows, getting taller, the body measures time. It's Chronos. It's a measurement of it. The mind is the Kairos. What is the body experiencing? What is going on around me? How are all these other things happening? The Logos is the spirit, because the spirit can see the future because it exists outside of time. So this whole future understanding, it doesn't exist, but it is predictable. And so we can collapse the time. This is often what a lot of the younger generation talks about when they say like timelines and, the timeline change and these things. They're not necessarily wrong. The differentiation is that timeline doesn't actually exist. You are on a uniform coalescence of time, and a set of choices can coalesce that time to an outcome. And then that becomes the now, the inevitable possibility. So the body is the past. It's being destroyed constantly. The mind is where we live. We live in the mental health body. And the spirit is what provides us future. And that comes down to, bear with me on this one, how the fifth dimension would interplay into the fourth dimension rationality. So we have X, Y, Z in time, that's three-dimensional, into fourth dimensional, that's us, that's moving, that's doing. We are the doers that are trapped in this body. If we add a W axis, it would intersect those other axes at a key point, just like time intersects the X, Y, and Z axis at a key point to say this is the center of this third-dimensional piece moving in fourth dimensions in rationale to all of the other pieces in that system. If we had a larger dimensional piece, time would be the slice, that 22 trillion times a second. That would be its base measurement. And in doing that, a piece of that fifth dimension would be then leaking through, just like the two dimension, the XY plane, the flat surface, is given height and now has three-dimensional planes, and then is provided movement, giving it a fourth dimensional measurement. Time, X, Y, and Z would all be slicing what here we're representing as W. That W is the whole self. We would refer to that in most esoteric or exoteric texts, mostly esoteric, as soul. It's the encompassment of all of this. And the reason that really matters has to do with frequencies, and not just in the rationale that frequencies are how all physical matter is manifest, being that all physical matter is not grit, it's light-based. And light can be hard, soft, and all sorts of other different measurements. It just has to do with the frequency in which it's interacting. If we take this from a standpoint of how frequencies are referenced and also measured, it's no different than a computer. In fact, we're a really good representation of the data collecting device that's measuring, let's say, temperature. But we don't just measure temperature, we measure the five senses. We also measure the mental senses and also the spiritual senses. So, when we talk about intuition and the other possibilities that come along with spiritual senses that allow us to have these differentiations of perception and a participation in the doing. But all that aside, if we just think of it from the analogy of a computer, we have a CPU and RAM, front side bus, we have the GPU, the graphic processing unit, we have maybe some other peripherals, we have the network card, which attaches us to the rest of the network. All of those work on clock speeds, and they all have to reference a base clock speed so that they all can communicate appropriately. It's kind of like traffic down a highway. If you have 4 rows of traffic on one side and 4 rows of traffic on the other side, that's what input output is, right? So the amount of traffic that can go down one side, the amount of traffic that can go the other direction. If there's a bottleneck, if there's a jam up of traffic, it means that there's not enough frequency. There's not enough. A hertz rate is the way we measure that in CPUs and things like that. So if there's a bottleneck at the CPU or the RAM or the GPU, then we'll notice that in the system. That's kind of how we work. It's kind of how reality functions as far as time goes. We have 22 trillion times a second. That's the base clock speed. We have the X, Y, Z, and time, T, measurements. And we have the differentiation of spiritual health body, mental health body, and physical health body, of how those clock speeds get understood. The spiritual health body has the highest frequency capacity. So in the terms of a CPU, it'd be a very high-end CPU that has a high gigahertz, or maybe it's a 4 gigahertz processor, right? The mental health body is a bit slower because it has to talk between the things. And so, in a poor example, it might be like RAM, random access memory, and it might have a clock speed that, this isn't exactly how this works, but let's say it's 2 in comparison to the 4. So maybe it's only megahertz compared to gigahertz. And then we have the physical health body, and that is the health body that we all agree on the same clock speed. That's what allows us all to interact, because at the physical level, we agree hard is hard. We agree this is white. We agree maybe this is silver. This is black. We agree that this can move, but it's a physical hardness. On the back, we have cardboard, and that's actually a little softer, but we agree that the measurement all happens at the same time. That's why the physical body is so important. That's why we have to take care of it, because it is sensing and measuring the time. The physical body keeps track of the chronos, the mind, the kairos, and the spiritual body is the logos. It's the presence. It's the being a part of that flow. And so as the reference speed decreases, we step down the health bodies. As the frequency increases, we head back up to what's known as the true base clock, that 22 trillion times a second. If we were fast enough to process that, we would see it, but we don't. And so that's why the spiritual health body, mental health body, and physical health body can be out of unison, because the clocks work so differently. When we talk about mental health and we talk about mental experiences, specifically maybe if we talk about psychedelics or something along those lines, not a doctor, none of this is medical advice, and I'm not making any rationale for doing these things, but that increases the frequency capacity of the mental health body. So too does a pre-workout or caffeine or any nootropic. It increases that bandwidth, that flow through, so that it can process a little bit more closer to that base clock. Who knows about the spiritual health body, about how fast that actually processes things, but that all comes into how this W-axis would pertain. That's fifth dimension. That time slicing, this self slicing down into the X, Y, Z, and T planes is just a piece of that. And so you can call that, by definition, consciousness. The mind and the body and the spiritual health that make up the whole totality of the self, what we want to consider the soul, the encompassing, that is the consciousness. And that consciousness is a measuring structure. And the more we spend time learning about our presence as far as logos goes, the more we can not worry so much about the chronos, and more spend even more time on the kairos, the subjective understanding of it, so that you don't have to rush, you don't have to be in a hurry. You can enjoy how things play out and how things work, and that these cyclical time flows the chaos, creation, order, and destruction all have a cycle, and inside those cycles they work very specifically. That specific work is due to the intersection of that W. I'm not saying it's preordained. I stay out of the spiritual conversations for the most part. But as far as consciousness is concerned, I would say, due to how the structures work out, that slicing of time in that 22 trillion times a second is no different than us taking a reading of all of our different senses, or using a computer to map out what's really going on around it by taking readings. We're just a super advanced reading device that all agree upon a physical form that's functional and can be interacted with. We do little with understanding the mind and the spirit. And I think as a society, we're headed that way. And to give just a little bit more here on how this really affects you and maybe your families and just your interactions with other people, the time frequency you act on is vastly different than everyone else's. Everyone has different kairos. This everyone in this situation here, yeah, we agree. 22 trillion times a second base clock for how existence works. We understand, whatever magnitude we want to call that as the physical health body. This mental health body, we're all over the place. Some people are still living in the 1950s. Some people are trying to live in the 2030s, 2050s, 3000s. In your own communities, you might find that someone is ahead of time or behind the times. Kids these days are being forced to be more spiritual because they have to keep up with how quickly time is moving now. Because this is just a measurement. And we're becoming much more aware of these little slices. So if that's 1 trillionth scale, we're becoming aware of more of those. This is why kids are on TikTok and doing social media. And it's just lightning quick. This is why people feel like the timeline's speeding up. This is why people feel like things are accelerating, because we're becoming more aware of it. And that's a tough thing to line up. Just like, if the processor in a computer and the RAM and the GPU and the front side bus and all the SSD, all the storage unit, if they can't talk on the same frequencies, by speed frequency, then things lag or things don't get, maybe there's a corruption in the system. We have that right now, in this moment, because no one's living here. They're not living in the present. They're not living in the now. They're either living in the past or trying to live in the future, and neither of those exists. We must be present in the moment, because that's the part that matters. That's the whole system is designed to measure the now. And that's why it's so important for us to live in the now and to act in the now and to be present in the now, not just be in the present, but present in the now, because that's the eternal peace that defines all of human existence. And our disconnect with how time works is the disconnect on the mental side of it, that we can't coalesce on the understanding of how it works. And that's a poor description of a hyperlogical reasoning point, because that's how my brain works, is on this hyperlogical level. So without that, interrupting all of it, what that really means is just to be present in the now, because that's the part that you are designed, at however you want to believe that saying, to do. That's the definition of being a physical moving human.